Hi, Kim. Thanks for helping my project. Could you say a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm a sci-fi author. I am the VP of operations for the Atlanta Writers Club. I have two daughters. I live in Atlanta. And I'm also a podcaster for Wild Women Who Write Take Flight, where we interview authors and other industry professionals with a primary goal of helping and supporting female writers. Every once in a while, we'll interview a male writer, but mainly women. And so it's interesting to be on the other side. And this morning when I woke up, I was like, well, I need to know more about Nathan because I had read some things and I had to remind myself, you're not running this interview. This is a discussion with him and this is his thing. And because I'm so used to having to do the research and the work, me and the other wild women, because I do that podcast with four other women. But I've also always had a fascination with, science and physics and theoretical physics. I remember reading, just being obsessed with books. Well, in the 90s, it was Fred Allen Wolfe and Paul Davies. And now I have a lot of Michio Kaku and things like that. But my book, Stealing Aries, has to do with colonizing Mars and even Enceladus. And so when my friend Dusty Roberts, who's also a sci-fi author, told me about your project, I was so excited. You don't even know. I was like, well, where can I hear some of this? And how can I be on it? And I want to be part of it. And this is so exciting. And I was just really thrilled. And kudos to you for taking this on. This is wonderful.
It's definitely been a big growing experience and learned a lot. So talking about stealing Aries and colonizing Mars, one of the questions I've started asking people is, imagine like your descendants have immigrated to Mars and it's like 200 years in the future and it's your great granddaughter who's in high school on Mars in history class looking back at the 2020s. And I'm looking forward to reading Stealing Aries, but I'm kind of curious, what time period do you have it set in?
It's 500 years in the future. Yeah, and it's been terraformed, and they've set up a colony there. And originally I had a pandemic sweep the earth, and I had written this 3 or 4 years before the pandemic hit. But then I realized I couldn't use that because at the time I was shopping Stealing Aries to agents and editors, and they were saying, no pandemic stories, because I started shopping it right about when the pandemic hit. And I was like, I didn't write this during the pandemic. I wrote this 3 or 4 years prior, because to me, that was an interesting concept. Like, what if we colonize somewhere and that colony is still, or that base, is still dependent, at least partially, on help from Earth? What happens if a catastrophe strikes here? And we can't help them because we're so busy here trying to help ourselves. And that's what happens is but anyways, originally I had a pandemic sweep the earth, but then people were like, no pandemic stories, because their inbox was getting flooded with them. And so I said, what else would be interesting? A lot of people don't realize that Yellowstone National Park sits on top of a caldera. And I said, well, there's my new catastrophe. Let's have that caldera blow. And then ash would circle the earth, depending on how bad it goes up. Ash would circle the earth for generations, maybe, just depending on how bad it is. And so that was my new tragedy. But yeah, thinking about, if your great granddaughter is in high school, sitting on Mars. I mean, that's fascinating, the idea of that.
So looking at your Aries colony 500 years in the future, do you ever have a scene or a character that kind of looks back at us in the 2020s?
Yeah, 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 I do. And there's almost this comic way that they see us, as barbaric, um, because one of the characters still likes to use, he's like, I like the weight of an actual weapon, like an old revolver. But then the doctor says, that's barbaric, to use projectiles to defend yourself. It's barbaric what it does to the human body, because they're using weapons that even if, security there has to shoot someone, they're using weapons that use wave energy. And so it's different. It's not like a massacre of someone shot, it's a different kind of defense. And then because they can't find the parts for their little med bots that mend wounds, and their rescue waves that heal them, that they program them for a certain wavelength and they can heal different things in the body. Those things start breaking down, and a lot of their technology takes a setback after the ash circles the earth. And so a lot of the medical things that they were using, they can't use them. And so they're looking back at what we had to use now, and they're having to rely on old tech. So that's exactly what they do, Nathan, is they say, oh, well, what were they using then? And they're like, well, they were dying of heart attacks then. They were having to use insulin because they couldn't correct, because it's such an easy thing for them to correct what's wrong with their pancreas. So no one had diabetes anymore. No one was dying of heart attacks anymore. No one had cancer anymore, because these were easy things to correct with their new technology. And so now they're like, well, somebody just died of a heart attack in District 6 because we can't fix our med waves now because of the gray death is what they called it when the ash circled the earth. And they're like, well, yeah, well, people can't die of heart attacks. That was happening in the 21st century. What? They're just astonished that we were actually dying of a heart attack. That's unheard of. So yeah, they think it's just the weirdest thing, the things we had to deal with.
I wonder if it was even more extreme than that. Like they may have even lost the word or the concept of it.
Yeah, it's so foreign to them to even think of it, that somebody would have to inject themselves, daily, or, because their pancreas was failing them. They can't just even conceive of that, but they're having to conceive of that because once the ash started circling the earth and they couldn't manufacture the chips or the certain parts they needed for these brilliant, I call them rescue waves, that they could correct things in their body if they had the certain, frequency. They're having to take a step back, and they can't believe it, so barbaric. But yeah.
It's kind of interesting, our relationship with the past. I mean, thinking back from the 2020s back to like 1520s, I'm sure we think of them as being barbaric in many ways.
Yeah. And we're and then they're going to see it that way about us, and it's so hard to imagine, but true. Yeah, I'm sure they will. And that's so weird that they'll see us that way, but they will, and we'll just be so strange to them, almost ape-like.
But you also have sort of this completely opposite point of view of things and people in the past, of kind of like people who have possessed the received wisdom. I'm thinking about like the founding fathers in the U.S. and a lot of religious types of people. On one hand, we see like the times as barbaric, but then like certain like people of those times more enlightened than we could possibly be today. And it's just kind of interesting that have sort of like these two, I mean, this, from my perspective, a sense of two extremes in terms of relating to the past.
I like that. You make a really good point. Yeah, because there are, because my degree is actually in history, and I do think back on it like that sometimes. They had a perspective and a wisdom that we really don't have in a lot of ways, that we've kind of lost, and an appreciation certainly for what they have and what they've had to fight for that we may have lost in some ways. And yeah, you're right. That's a good perspective.
I also wonder, strong people don't develop machines to do physical work. It's the weak people that do. And, people with extremely good memories don't create ways to store information for easy recall. And it's almost like the strengths and weaknesses have like a really interesting interplay in terms of development and stuff. But really comfortable people, probably aren't interested are in hardship. And as we become more technologically advanced and more comfortable as a society, it seems like exploration becomes less and less likely, just because it requires us getting out of our comfort zone in a way that we haven't developed the strength for. I mean, to kind of put it in a different perspective, a person in Europe during Columbus's time coming over to North America may have seemed weird from a standpoint of, completely new place. But in terms of like the day-to-day life, it probably wasn't that much harder for them than it was back in Europe. But for people here on Earth in like Houston and Atlanta to go to Mars, that's probably a huge difference. And I was just wondering, how do you see people actually going over, kind of being able to explore? I mean, what pushes them out of their comfort zone?
That's a good question. I feel like there's something in us I feel like we're innately explorers. I feel like there's something deep within us that, yeah, I think in a lot of ways we're lazy, but I think there's also something just in our DNA that we just can't stand it. We just have to explore. I just feel like it's hardwired in us, I really do. And there's also an interesting thing where, they get on Mars and it's not quite enough for them. And they push further out in Stealing Aries and they end up on Enceladus and they create a base there, which seems weird because you look at it and it's just a ball of ice and you think, why even bother with that? But then I read an article that said, and my mind just went, but that said Enceladus might even be easier in some ways to put a base there, because when they look at all the cracks on Enceladus and these geysers there that are, I mean, they can see it, with the telescopes that are shooting off Enceladus, the ice, that's flying into to spaces, that there's obviously some serious heat energy going on under there. And they think that they could harness that, right, and use it to create a base there. If they could figure out how to harness that Enceladus in some ways might be easier than some other planets. And although it looks forbidding, and why would you even go there? Because it's just a chunk of ice so you get comfortable one place and you think, well, we've gone as far as we want to go, or as far as we're comfortable going. And then you go even further. I just think there's something in human beings that want to push further and go further. I believe it's innate. I believe we're made for that. I believe we're strong in that way. And I believe we need to and have to, because I think there are so many things that could happen to the Earth. The caldera going up, right? I think there's just so many things that can, or we destroy it ourselves, that we have to. But I mean, there's a good counter argument too. And a lot of people say, well, there's so many people here that are starving and can't afford proper health care. And so why would you spend your money sending people to the moon and to Mars when there are so many people here suffering? And I wouldn't want to ignore that either. I do think we should be taking care of that, and that does bother me. But of course, being a sci-fi author and loving, you know, space and the idea of exploration, I'm all for it. But I do sympathize with that point of view, absolutely, and we should be doing all we can, to help others and ease suffering. But yeah, I just think it's in us to get out there.
Of course, those same people that ask that question, why are we going to the moon whenever we have people suffering here on Earth, would also have no problems in terms of going to a sporting event or a movie with the people just blocks away living underneath the freeway. So
Absolutely, we would drive right past them. I mean, that's true. Yeah. And are they stopping and getting out? And so yeah.
it's funny when people become caring.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because we all do it. We pick and choose. Well, I don't really care about space. I think we should use the money elsewhere, but I do care about this over here. So yeah, we do. We do that.
And it's also interesting in terms of like military capability, spending. I mean, I think this year the increase in military spending in the U.S. is equal to 1.5 times NASA's entire budget, which is, it's kind of interesting. I mean, it's spent on a lot of things, but one of which is like nuclear missiles, nuclear weapons, for sure, which have no purpose other than to actually destroy a lot of things. So it seems, even if you spent that money on something that had even the potential of helping and discovering and improving life, that would be better than spending it on something that had no other purpose than to destroy.
Absolutely destroy. And when you really delve in, because I think some people just think, well, they go up there and float around, look at stars, but when you read about a lot of really dig into a lot of the experiments that they do, on the space station and things like this, a lot of it's medical, and they're doing some interesting, worthwhile research, while they're up there, so I think some people haven't looked into it far enough either.
And that's true. So when did you find out that we were planning to go back to the moon?
Oh goodness. I guess it would have been not that long ago. Maybe 6 months ago. Honestly, you would think, because I love reading all these books and everything, it would have been, but I think for me it's more about, I go through Amazon and bookstores, and I'm looking at books on the shelves. I'm not reading as much of the current event kind of thing. I love theoretical physics books and fiction books and things like that. So you knew it way before I did.
I mean, most of the people I talk to, I would say 80% of them don't know we're going back to the moon.
Oh, good. So it's not just me. Yeah.
Absolutely not. And I think even with the sampling bias, living here in Houston with the Johnson Space Center, Space Center Houston has billboards up, going back to the moon to stay, with pictures of the Orion capsule. And then, just the fact that the people that are willing to talk to you about space and going back to the moon probably are interested and know a little bit more than the general public. So the actual percentage of people that know that we're going back to the moon is probably far, far less than that. But I was wondering, what your thoughts are on how we get our information and how people find out things. Because back in 1969, with essentially 3 broadcast TV stations, just 1 or 2 newspapers per city, a few dozen national periodicals. If you made it into all of those, chances are everybody knew whatever that thing was. And, going back to the moon, or going to the moon the first time, was big enough to make it into all of that. And I think, if you ask people on the street back then, it'd be hard to find somebody that didn't know. Whereas today, our methods of communicating with each other is so fragmented that we're all operating with inside of our own little information bubble. And, either we're completely deep in the information that we're interested in, or we're completely ignorant of everything outside of that. I was just wondering what your thoughts were in terms of that.
Yeah, and it seems sad to me, because I remember when I was watching Apollo 13 and they were, gathered around, and they were so worried that the astronauts wouldn't make it back, and they're all gathered around this one TV, and there was this sense of community, and they're all pulling together for the same thing. And now, even with that, I honestly believe, even with the big tragedy going on, if that were our astronauts, today, there would be such a smaller number of people pulling for them, and the rest of them would just be going through their social media feed, and they wouldn't even know that was happening, and they would just be looking at whatever it is, fashion or their latest celebrity, whatever, and wouldn't know and wouldn't care, because there's such a smattering of news and information. And I don't know, it kind of bothers me, because I feel like we're not, because there's just a smattering of information and news, we're not united, and we're not pulling for the same things anymore. I think there's a sadness there for me, but what can you do?
That's a good question. Since you mentioned Apollo 13, I wanted to toss this out there. On Monday, I got to listen to a talk by Fred Hayes, the only currently alive Apollo 13 astronaut, and he talked about his career and his challenges in Apollo 13, and it's just really, really good to see him.
Oh yeah, it's wonderful. We I would love to see that. We went to the NASA Glenn Science Center in Cleveland. I live in Atlanta, but we were in Cleveland a month or two ago, and it was so wonderful. They had a lot of things from the previous missions, and of course a lot of memorabilia and things there for John Glenn, and interviews and things you could watch, and little experiments that were interactive and all. And I just loved it so much. And yeah, it's good stuff. But when you're talking about how people get their news and information, I was thinking, even then with Apollo 13, there's that scene, or I think it was Marilyn Lovell had showed up with her kids. She was at NASA, and they would usually watch the launch. Was it the launch they were watching? Or no, they went there to watch, a broadcast from space, and she thought it was going to be on TV for everybody to see. And they went and watched it there at the Space Center, but she found out, oh no, this was not broadcast to everybody. Do you remember that scene?
I do. Basically, after Apollo 11, the networks lost interest in covering, the space program. So, so Apollo 13, he's on his way to the moon. He's doing his show, which had become, I guess, customary at that point, and nobody's watching it, and he thinks he's playing to the world. So that's a good point too.
Even then, there was this moving away from this common goal, and this supporting of exploration, like we're all in this together. And there was this sadness that people were letting go of this sense of being in it together. And I remember watching that and feeling this sense, like sharing in their sense of, well, this is a little sad, a little painful, because no one's in this with us, like, I guess she felt like her and her family were deeply invested because, they were so worried about him, and the rest of the world wasn't watching. And there is sort of a sadness, but and I guess the point with that was people weren't invested until these people, the astronauts, were maybe at death's door and gonna die, and then suddenly everyone's interested. And that's why they say the works of Flannery O'Connor, she's not a sci-fi author, but she wasn't, but her idea was people don't get the experience of God or those deeper experiences unless you really shake them and have something just jarring to the psyche. And so I guess that was kind of the deal with Apollo 13 too. It's like people don't unite unless somebody's in deep peril. But it's kind of sad too, because you
Well,
do great things when you have that unity.
well, I've been kind of thinking about this like with sports and with war and with politics. It seems like people's interest really spikes when they feel like they might be able to tip the balance or when the outcome might be in question. Um, and, NASA does everything it can in terms of safety and testing and to make sure the outcome's not in question, which is in the completely opposite side of people's natural tendency to be interested in something.
That must be something deep within us, because when you think about it, and I know this veers off into the area of superstition, but when a person's team, for example, when they're watching football or something, is, maybe they think their team's going to lose or something, there's this funny thing where somebody will say, don't set your soda down or don't set your beer down until they kick this field goal or whatever. Like they want to believe that they can somehow affect the outcome of something or help their team win. So I think you're right. I think there's something within us where we want to feel like we can help tip the scales, or there's something innate there, isn't there? Yeah.
I think Apollo 11 was really interesting because people weren't sure we could do it, that we would do it first, that the Russians wouldn't beat us to it. But then after Apollo 11, it's like everything else was victory laps. People aren't interested in watching the runner go around the track after the race is over with.
And I think that's one of the reasons why we'll keep pushing further out into space, because people want that. They kind of lose interest unless you keep going further. And if you don't, they kind of get, bored or complacent. But I guess that the other argument could be made, well, yeah, they get bored and complacent. So
Hmm. So you have a vision for where humanity is 500 years from now, instilling Aries. 200 years is almost halfway there. How far do you think we'll get in 200 years?
I don't think, I believe we could get pretty far on the Mars mission, I feel. And I think that there's a lot that could be done with technology and maybe self-replicating nanobots. And because I like to read science articles and things like that. Hey, I didn't know we were headed back to the moon until maybe 6-8 months ago, whatever. But at the same time, I don't know that we'll be quite as far along as far as our daily lives here. Like it'll change. And the reason I say that is because when you look back, say 100 years or 80 years, people thought we would be in flying cars. and you look at some of the vision of what we had now. Oh, we'll be in flying cars and we'll have this and we'll have that, and we don't, and I think sometimes people think really grandiose, and that's not necessarily what happens. But then again, when you look how far we've come just in 50 years. I remember watching Star Trek: The Next Generation, love it, and seeing Picard talking to somebody at Starfleet Command on his computer, and I'm like, wow, he can see the person that he's talking to on the screen. I wonder if that'll happen in my lifetime.
And
This
here
is
we
when it
are.
was, yeah, this is when it was, when it wasn't reruns, and here we are. So I could be wrong about all that, but I don't know that our daily lives will be as far along as some people imagine, but maybe. Yeah, I definitely think in 200 years, we'll have a colony on Mars and everything. Yeah, for sure.
So if you could, would you take a trip to space?
It would be a definite yes if I didn't have children. But having children, I think, would give me a little pause. And I think that's mainly because I remember, when Columbia, the tragedies with the space shuttles. And I remember just sitting there. I remember it was a snow day here in Atlanta, with the first shuttle when it exploded. And I remember just sitting there, and that little bit of time where they weren't quite sure what had happened, and there was explosion, a piece went off this way and a piece of it went off that way, and I remember just feeling stunned, and just I don't know, I guess we knew it could happen, but then when it did happen, we were like, no way, that didn't just, so that's always in the back of my head, but I mean, yeah, if I didn't have kids, it would be a definite yes, but now it would give me pause. What about yourself?
Oh, I've been waffling on that for the past 3 years. As I hear people's reasons for going or not going, I'm like, yeah. So, I don't know. I tend to think, I think I would probably go to orbit for sure. I'd like to go to the moon. Mars sounds interesting, but I definitely would need to be a different person before I went there in terms of skills and capabilities. So I don't know. I want to say yes. I've done a 0G flight, so I've experienced weightlessness for 30 seconds at a time. So
that's cool. That sounds fun.
Yeah, but okay. So assuming, so the kids have, graduated from college, gotten married, doing their own life. Of course, then you have grandchildren. So there's that. But putting that aside, let's say you do go to space. Is there anything particular that you want to do there?
That's a good question. I think for me, and this may sound like a very woo-woo answer, but I think it's just more of a spiritual experience, this idea that, that this is all just so much bigger than me and so much grander than me. And I love the idea of that all the stuff that I worry about and just every day get up with all these petty worries and nonsense, really, when you get right down to it, how much of the things that we worry about really do matter at the end of the day. But I'm sure that when you're out there and it's just you and the vastness, around you of space and the stars, and there's nowhere for you to go, you can't go, you're just right there. I think that would be something, just to experience that. I think that would be the ultimate spiritual experience, to just put you in your place in the universe, but in the best way possible. So that, I think for some people that might not sound like an answer, or that might not be a thing that you would do in space, but for me, that would be the thing to do in space, right?
Have you heard of the Moon project?
No, I don't
So
think
there's
so.
this Japanese billionaire that's contracted with SpaceX to send a group of artists around the moon. And so the idea is you would have like these people that are able to connect on like an emotional level with other people, kind of experience this transformative viewpoint and be able to create some art around it that might be able to, kind of allow other people to appreciate on a level that's really hard to with just images and kind of what we have now. But
Oh, I had to write that down because I want to look that up. That's really neat. My oldest is an art major. She creates some beautiful things. I'll have to tell her all about that.
well, one of the Apollo astronauts became an artist.
It seems like I heard that.
Yeah, Alan Bean, he came back and became a painter.
Yeah, I could see that. You get up there and it probably does change the way you think. Yeah, I would imagine. Very much
Yeah,
so.
he had the opportunity to be, like the shuttle commander for like the test flights, and he's like, anybody could do that, but I've been to the moon, and be able to take that experience somehow and communicate it to other people through art is
Yeah.
something that other people can't do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Where do you think we'll be like in 200 years from now?
Well, optimistically, I would think we would be in Mars, the moon. Space would be a common everyday occurrence. The part that gives me pause, though, is if you look back over history, sort of like the technological achievements that we've had in the past 150 years, it's not a normally occurring thing. That didn't happen before. And there's a lot of differences that we have. We have more population, fewer of us are having to we have, as a species, we have way more free time. Now, whether or not we're investing that into actually innovation and discovery versus other activities that seem to be self-consuming and don't really amount to much is a question. But I'm just kind of concerned that we don't understand sort of the engines of innovation, and that we think that innovation is a naturally occurring thing when it's not. And I'm just afraid that we'll actually lose some critical knowledge and skills, and society might go the opposite direction. Sort of like in your scenario with the Sterling Aries and them having to rediscover this old technology because they're not getting resupplied from Earth. I can see that same thing happening on Earth whenever critical knowledge gets lost and systems stop working. And so I think that's probably a very likely scenario as well, which is kind of scary.
Well, yeah, and somebody mentioned the other day, what happens when nobody knows how to read a clock anymore? You know?
Yeah, watch out at look over there at your 2:00, and if you're like, where it's not 2:00 yet. I have 4 hours to wait to look out. No.
Yeah, there's a scene in the book too where Mars couldn't get resupplied with the little nanobots that would stitch people up, and there was an explosion in one of the pub on Mars, and so they didn't have the nanobots, and the doctor comes at this fellow with a needle and thread, and she says, "Oh, you're so lucky. Most medical schools don't teach this anymore, but mine did, and you are so fortunate." that I'm one of the few doctors that still knows how to do this. And he said, what are you doing to me? You know, because she's coming at him with a needle and thread. And he's like, that's barbaric. What is that? And she's like, oh, I'm going to sew you up. Because he had never seen anybody with stitches, right? And it's a skill that very few people had, you know. And she's like, I'm very good. I know how to do this, you know. And he's like, no, because they would just put nanobots on it and it just like sew it right up. She's gonna stitch him up. And he's like, you're gonna do what?
I think you know, we have to guard against magic. So much in our life, like we should own the world we live in. And by own, I mean fully understand like the technology and what's required to make our lives work. And it seems like at any point that we're willing to step away from that and have areas where it's okay for them to be mysterious and not be interested in them, that we're setting ourselves up for kind of a world that you know, won't support us long term.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah.
And so I had a question about your writing and your target audience. How much do you write for sci-fi readers, and how much do you write for readers that have yet to discover sci-fi?
Yeah, I like to say that it's a good balance, because when the story opens, the main character, my protagonist, Harlow Hansen, she's wanting to pull off a heist. They have this dormant starship and she wants to strip the gold off of it. And she wants to go in, strip the gold off the wiring. And so she says, well, and her friend's trying to talk her out of it. And she says, well, you know, the self-replicating nanobots that, you know, terraform the planet, you know, because they were spewing, you know, gases that would help terraform the planet, was nothing. You know, putting the black hole at the center of Mars to control our gravity was nothing. Well, she's saying that was a big deal. That was a big deal. And putting the black hole at the center of Mars was a big deal. But, you know, stripping the gold off under the nose of an arrogant prince, this will be nothing, you know. So there's a lot of technology in it, but I try not to belabor it, if that makes sense. So I feel like it's there for people who love sci-fi and love technology and love to think about those things. But for people who are like, I don't like sci-fi, and do that thing with their face when you tell them that it's sci-fi, I see the look come over their face. And I'm always watching for it when I tell them I write sci-fi. I don't know if you've noticed this look. People get that look like, or their eyes glass over if their face doesn't scrunch up, maybe their eyes glass over when you tell them it's sci-fi. And I'm like, look, there's technology in it, but I don't belabor it. Like I don't go on for 4 or 5 pages trying to get into the intricacies of how self-replicating nanobots would sit there decade after decade, pumping greenhouse gases, you know, into the air to create the canopy, to terraform, you know. So yeah, there's sci-fi in it, there's technology in it, but it's not belabored. It doesn't go on for page after page. So I think that it's a good balance. That's what I would say. And it's more character driven, and there is a love story in it. So I think people who feel like they have a tough time sticking with a sci-fi story could read it for the relationships. And I feel like people who like good sci-fi could stick with it and could tolerate the relationship stuff because it's a good sci-fi story. So that's my answer. Did that make me sound like a politician?
No, It's good. People are very diverse, and it's hard to find someone to connect with large amounts of them. So,
Yeah, true.
well, Kim, I feel like we could talk all day, but I imagine you had other things planned. So,
I'm sure you
um,
do too.
is there, well, I guess first of all, I definitely would appreciate it if you could connect me with other people. I have over 800 more days of interviews to go between now and the end of 2024, and really interested in connecting with anybody willing to talk, regardless of their viewpoint. Um,
Okay,
and so,
love to.
so that would be fantastic if you could connect me with anybody.
Oh, great. Yeah, I didn't want to drive you crazy with people and suggestions of people. So if that's fine, then I definitely know some more people.
Yeah, if you know 800 more of them, that would be fantastic.
Okay, sure.
But is there anything you wanted to say in closing, or something that uh, is really near and dear to you that we didn't talk about?
I think it's great that you have opened this space up to to just let people talk about this and you know give people a space to talk about, because I feel like we talk so much in our society now, and there's so much social media, but how much are we talking about things that affect all of humanity like this does? And this really does. I mean, because we may need somewhere else to go at some point, and getting out into space, that's the big foot stepping out into you know the unknown and making it known and everything. And yeah, so I just, this is a good thing you're doing. I think it's really, and I also feel like this is one of those things that in the future, after we're out there, it's almost like a time capsule. Somebody will look back on this and find these maybe 200-300 years from now and listen to them and just go, wow, this is what these people were thinking and feeling about this. And so this is a really cool thing you're doing. I dig it.
That's what I like to tell people, is my target audience hasn't even been born yet.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm really just honored to be part of it. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Kim, and I look forward to reading your book when it comes out. And
Thank you.
I hope you have a good rest of your day.
You too. Thanks.